Hi, I'm Mike Bovingdon. I am the pastor of the Lutheran Church of the Good Shepherd and want to welcome you to the third Sunday of Easter. And this morning, our gospel lesson comes from the 24th chapter of St. Luke. I want to read that to you this morning from the translation called The Message, which was by Eugene Peterson. That same day, two of the disciples, two that aren't the 12 that we're most familiar with, two of them were walking to the village Emmaus, about 7 miles outside of Jerusalem. They were deep in conversation, going over all these things that had happened. And in the middle of their talk and questions, Jesus came up and walked along with them. But they were not able to recognize who he was. And he asked, "What is this you're discussing so intently as you walk along?" They just stood there, long-faced, like they had lost their best friend. Then one of them said, his name was Cleopas. He said, "Are you the only one in Jerusalem who hasn't heard what happened during the last few days?" Jesus said, "What happened?" They said, "The things that happened to Jesus of the Nazarene. He was a man of God, a prophet, dynamic in work and word, blessed by both God and all the people. Then our high priest and leaders betrayed him, got him sentenced to death, crucified him. We had our hopes that he was the one about to deliver Israel. And it's now the third day since it happened. Now, some of our women have completely confused us. Early this morning, they were at the tomb and couldn't find his body. And they came back with a story that they had seen a vision of angels who had said he was alive. Some of our friends went off to the tomb to check, and they found it empty, just as the women had said, but they didn't see Jesus. And Jesus said to them, "So thick-headed, so slow-hearted, why can't you simply believe all that the prophets said? Don't you see that these things had to happen? That the Messiah had to suffer, and only then enter into his glory?" Then he started at the beginning with the books of Moses, went on through all the prophets, pointing out everything in the scriptures that referred to him. They came to the edge of the village where they were headed, and he acted as if he were going on, but they pressed him, "Stay and have supper with us. It's nearly evening and the day is done." So he went in with them. And here's what happened. He sat down at the table with them, taking the bread. He blessed and broke and gave it to them. At that moment, open-eyed, wide-eyed, they recognized him. And he disappeared. Back and forth, they talked. "Didn't we feel on fire as he conversed with us on the road? And he opened the scriptures for us?" They didn't waste a minute. They were up and on their way back to Jerusalem. They found the 11 and their friends gathered together, talking away. "It's really happened. The master has been raised up. Simon saw him." Then the two went over everything that had happened on the road and how they recognized him when he broke the bread. While they were saying all this, Jesus appeared to them and said, "Peace be with you." They thought they were seeing a ghost. They were scared half to death. He continued with them, "Don't be upset. And don't let all these doubting questions take over. Look at my hands, look at my feet. It's really me. Touch me. Look me over from head to toe. A ghost doesn't have muscle and bone like this." As he said this, he showed them his hands and feet, and they still couldn't believe what they were seeing. It was too much. It seemed too good to be true. He asked, "Do you have any food?" They gave him a piece of leftover fish they had cooked. He took it and he ate it right before their eyes. Then he said, "Everything I told you while I was with you comes to this. All the things written about me in the law of Moses and the prophets and in the Psalms have to be fulfilled." He went on to open their understanding of the Word of God, showing them how to read their Bibles this way. "You can see now how it is written that the Messiah suffers, rises from the dead on the third day, and then a total life change through the forgiveness of sins is proclaimed in his name to all nations. Starting from here, starting from Jerusalem. You're the first to hear and see it. You're my witnesses. What comes next is very important. I'm sending what my Father promised you, so stay here in the city until he arrives. You're equipped with power from on high. It's the gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Grace to you and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. I know, if you've been watching these things along, you see the progression. I'm looking a good bit more shaggy right now. And Governor Kemp has opened up the barber shop so I can go get a haircut, but I'm not. I'm not going because my life and your life are more important than a haircut. Although I do think I probably need to get a tattoo. If you have suggestions, put them in the comments. Let me know what tattoo you think I ought to get. Maybe because I'm a bit shaggy is why I've been thinking about this song. One of my favorite songwriters is a man named John Gorka. Excuse me. John is a poet, and he understands the soul of human nature, and he understands the rhythm of the world, and he writes songs and music that matter. He also writes other stuff. And this song that I'm going to share with you, the first verse of, is some of his other stuff. It's not as deep, but it's just as true. And the name of the song is People My Age. And the verse goes like this. People my age have started looking gross. I can't say all, and I shouldn't say most, but I've seen them in the grocery. I've seen them up close. People my age have started looking gross. Somewhere along the line, I got older. I don't know when it happened. Sort of like Paulette, my wife's father, once said. He looked in the mirror and said, "Who is that old man?" But something happened, and it happened over a long period of time, and I didn't notice it. My arms were shrinking, and so I couldn't hold the newspaper far enough away to read it. Friends that I would get together with, we talk about our guitars, and we talk about our favorite beers, started talking about our prescriptions and our last medical procedure, and I started humming along with elevator music. Something happened. People would call me at 9 o'clock at night and say, "Did I wake you up?" We go through changes in our life. Some of those changes come gradual. They're so gradual we hardly even notice them. But nonetheless, we're changed. And other times things change in the blink of an eye. All of a sudden. And things are never again the same. But whether it's all of a sudden or slowly, like it or not, our lives are all about change. And the hope and prayer is that that change is for the better, that it makes us more aware, that makes us more empathetic, that it makes us less judgmental and a little more supporting in this world. The Easter story is one of those stories of dramatic change. I don't think it is for us. I think we've gotten so used to the story that is common. And it's hard for us to imagine the shock. But today we hear a story of two of the disciples who are walking down the road to Emmaus. Now, there's some symbolism for me in Emmaus. We've never found the town of Emmaus. All we know is that it was about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and we don't know anything else about it. There was nothing significant about the town of Emmaus. Town of Emmaus, therefore, to me, is sort of a nowhere place. It's not a place that you went to Emmaus to go to Emmaus. You went to Emmaus to get away from somewhere else. And here we have two disciples walking to get away from somewhere else. Two disciples sort of walking to nowhere. I've been on that journey. I've been on that journey where I don't know where I'm going or what I'm doing, and I'm just kind of lost and just got to just keep putting one foot in front of the other, and you don't know what's next. Well, these two disciples were overcome. They were overcome with what had been going on the last few days, overcome with their grief. See, the memory that these disciples had was of the Friday night Jesus. They hadn't met the Sunday morning Jesus yet. And their minds were so clouded and so full, and so they're sort of symbolically, at least for me, on that road to nowhere. They're just walking. They're just walking. And all of a sudden this fella shows up and they don't recognize him. I don't know why they don't recognize him. I have to assume the resurrected Lord is incredibly different than the pre-resurrected Lord. Maybe Jesus didn't want them to see him. Or maybe they're more like me than I want to admit. That sometimes our mind is so full of what's going on in our life. It's so full, maybe for them of grief, but maybe just of worry or cares or concerns. Or we're so full of ourselves, we don't see the one beside us. Because he is beside us, you know. Jesus being beside us isn't dependent upon our recognition of that. It's dependent on his promise that says right before his ascension, "Lo, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age." So he's there because he says he's there, and it's not a problem of presence, it's an issue of recognition. I know I miss the presence of Jesus sometimes because it comes in the simple ways. We talked a couple of weeks ago about Elijah going up on the mountain to meet God, and there was the big wind, there was the fires, earthquake, and God wasn't in those big flashes. He was in the still, silent voice. Maybe God's in a flash of light sometimes beside us, but most of the time he's beside us in somebody that loves us in spite of ourselves, or somebody that gives us a hand up, or prays for us even when we don't know they're praying for us. Maybe we experience Jesus in a little child whose love is gracious and full. In any moment when we're loved beyond who we are, if we're not so full of ourselves, maybe we can see that grace and that mercy around us. It took a while for Cleopas and the other disciple to see that presence of Jesus. It took sitting down and sharing a meal together. It took stepping away from the activity of the world. Are you and your family sitting around the table during this isolation time? I hope so. Because sitting around the table, you can see that God has graced you with a loving family and with those that care for you. I hope anyway, and I pray. And if he hasn't, I pray for you to still know that love and grace in your life. He's there. And he's there in the breaking of the bread. And he's there in the broken hearts. He's there in the blessing. And he's there in the walk to nowhere. It's not about achieving. It's not about succeeding. It's not about getting anything. It's just about being loved by the one who can do nothing else but love us. That presence changed the disciples, and it changed our world in a moment, in a flicker of an eye. For them, never again were things going to be the same. Death now had become life. Despair had become hope. Everything was flipped upside down. What mattered was no longer what mattered before. Now it was about grace. And all that stuff that Jesus had said about loving the least of these, of accepting a child and giving them a glass of water in his name, about loving one another being the only thing in this world that mattered, all that stuff, it must be true. And you know what? It changes us. Maybe gradually. Maybe pretty quick. But it changes us when we realize that God is beside us. And it changes us when we realize that God is right beside that person that we're running into. And it changes us when we remember that others bring the love of God into our lives, and we have the blessed opportunity to bring the love of God into their lives just by compassion and empathy and mercy and grace. God's with you. He's with you now. And he will be with you always, even to the end of the age. They were going through the line in the cafeteria, and they were at the Catholic school. And at the head of the table was a bowl of apples, and the nun had made a note: take only one. God is watching. Moving through the line at the other end of the table was a large plate full of cookies where little Johnny had wrote, take all you want. God is watching the apples. God's not watching to catch you steal an apple, but God sure is watching to find times to love and let you know you are loved. The resurrected Lord, the Sunday Lord, is with you always. Walking nowhere, walking somewhere. He's with you. Trust it. Believe it.